Imagine moving into your dream home, only to be accused of trespassing by the HOA. Here's how it all went down. I didn't just want a house. I wanted freedom. After years of renting under landlords who had opinions about everything from my door color to how often I parked in the driveway, I promised myself that when I finally bought a home, it would come with one non-negotiable condition. Absolutely no HOA. No monthly dues. No rulebook thicker than a dictionary. No neighborhood board meetings deciding what shade of beige my curtains were allowed to be. So when I found the listing, it felt like destiny. The ad said it clearly. No HOA. Quiet neighborhood. Private ownership. I read that line at least 5 times before even scheduling a viewing. The house wasn't massive or flashy, but it had charm. A wide front porch, a sturdy oak tree in the yard, and enough space between neighbors that I wouldn't hear someone sneeze through the walls. The realtor confirmed it twice. I even double-checked the property disclosure forms. Nothing. No association. No governing body. Just standard city ordinances like every other normal home. I closed on it 2 weeks later. Moving day felt like a personal victory parade. As I carried boxes up the walkway, I remember thinking how peaceful everything seemed. No posted neighborhood rules. No identical mailboxes lined up like soldiers. A couple of houses nearby had boats in their driveways. One even had a bright red door. That alone told me I was safe from the beige dictatorship of HOA culture. I spent the first evening on my porch with a folding chair and a cold drink, just enjoying the silence. No welcome committee. No clipboard carrying stranger asking for my email to add me to the community portal. Just birds, wind, and the occasional passing car. It was exactly what I had paid for. Autonomy. The next morning, I started making small changes to make the place feel like mine. I planted a few shrubs along the fence line, set up a basketball hoop in the driveway, and parked my pickup truck exactly where I wanted it. No worrying about approved landscaping plans. No measuring fence height against some arbitrary guideline written in 1998. It felt almost rebellious to simply exist without permission. A neighbor across the street waved politely but didn't approach. Another drove by slowly, giving my moving truck a long look, but kept going. I didn't think much of it. Every neighborhood has curious eyes when someone new moves in. By the end of the week, I had fully settled in. Utilities transferred. Internet installed. Change of address confirmed. The deed recorded with the county. Everything was official and documented, legally and financially. The home was mine, free and clear. I remember standing in my yard that Friday evening, admiring the sunset through the oak branches, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. I had escaped the world of neighborhood micromanagement. No one could tell me what to paint, where to park, or how to decorate for holidays. What I didn't realize, as I stood there enjoying my HOA-free dream, was that somewhere nearby, someone believed that every house in sight, including mine, fell under their authority, and she was about to make that very clear. 3 days after I finished unpacking the last box, I opened my front door and found a bright orange notice taped right at eye level. It wasn't tucked politely into the mailbox. It wasn't slipped under the door. It was aggressively taped across the center like a public warning. At the top, in bold letters, it read, HOA violation notice. Immediate action required. I actually laughed at first. I assumed it had to be a mistake. Maybe it was meant for someone else. Maybe some overzealous neighbor was confused. I pulled it down and read through the list of violations. Slowly. In that when the laughter stopped. Unauthorized landscaping modifications. Improper trash bin placement. Unapproved driveway sports equipment. They had itemized my shrubs. My garbage can being visible from the street on a non-collection day. And my basketball hoop. The notice demanded that I correct these issues within 48 hours or face escalating fines under community bylaws. Community bylaws. For a community I did not belong to. I went back inside, grabbed my closing documents, and double-checked the property details like I was cramming for an exam. Parcel number matched. Legal description matched. No HOA. I even logged onto the county property website and confirmed again that my address was not listed under any association. So I did the most reasonable thing possible. I ignored it. I figured whoever put it there would realize their mistake once they checked their records properly. Maybe they were used to dealing with homes inside their little bubble of authority and assumed mine was part of it. Honest mistake. Right. 2 days later, another notice appeared. This one wasn't tea orange. It was neon pink. It referenced the first violation and added a new one. Failure to respond to official HOA communication. There is now a fine listed at the bottom, $150, and a warning that continued non-compliance would result in further enforcement action. I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't tea confusion. This was deliberate. That afternoon, I noticed a woman slowly driving past my house twice. She rolled down her window the second time and stared directly at my yard, specifically at the shrubs I had planted. She was holding a clipboard. I wish I were exaggerating. I stepped outside just to make it obvious that I saw her. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She simply wrote something down and drove off. That's when I realized ignoring this might not make it go away. I walked over to my next door neighbor's house and casually asked if there was some kind of HOA I should know about. He hesitated before answering. Then he explained that most of the neighborhood belonged to an association formed years ago. But not every house, mine, along with a few older properties on the outer edge, had never been annexed into it. So you're not part of it, he confirmed. But they sometimes act like you are. That was the moment everything shifted. This wasn't a clerical error. This was an HOA that had decided my house should be under their authority, whether it legally was or not. When I got back home, I noticed something else. My trash bin had been moved from the side of my driveway to directly in front of my garage, almost like someone wanted it more visible. The pink notice flapped slightly in the wind against my door. It suddenly didn't feel like an innocent misunderstanding. It felt like the opening move in a power struggle I never signed up for. It happened on a Saturday afternoon while I was unloading a new bookshelf from the back of my truck. I had the tailgate down, music playing softly from inside the house, and I was halfway through maneuvering the box toward the porch when I heard the sharp click of heels on pavement. Excuse me. The tone alone told me this wasn't going to be pleasant. I turned around to see the same woman I'd spotted driving past earlier in the week. Late 50s. Oversized sunglasses. Perfectly styled hair that didn't move in the breeze. And yes, the clipboard was tucked firmly under her arm like a badge of authority. Can I help you? I asked, setting the box down. You can start by explaining why you're reoccupying this property without HOA authorization. I blinked. I am sorry. What? She stepped onto my driveway without hesitation, looking around as if she were inspecting a crime scene. This residence is located within the boundaries of our community association. You have failed to register, failed to submit architectural approvals, and failed to respond to formal notices. At this point, you are in violation of multiple bylaws. I stared at her, trying to decide whether this was a prank. This house isn't part of your HOA. She let out a tight, humorless laugh. That's not what our records indicate. Well, the county records say otherwise. She adjusted her sunglasses slowly. The previous owner was compliant for years. That's interesting, I replied, because the title company confirmed in writing that this property has never been annexed into your association. Her jaw tightened. Sir, you are trespassing within a managed community. I actually looked behind me to make sure she wasn't talking to someone else. I bought this house. I have the deed. I pay the property taxes. How exactly am I trespassing? By now, a few neighbors had begun peeking out from their porches. The tension was thick enough that even my music felt awkward. So I stepped inside and turned it off. She raised her voice slightly, clearly aware of the growing audience. You cannot simply move into a regulated neighborhood and refuse to comply with established governance. This isn't a regulated neighborhood, I said firmly. At least not for this property. She flipped through her clipboard dramatically. According to our internal map, your parcel falls inside the community boundary line. Your internal map doesn't override county filings. That seemed to strike a nerve. Her composure slipped just a little. We maintain the landscaping standards. We ensure property values remain high. We enforce uniformity. And you think you can just ignore that? I think I can live in my own house without asking permission, I replied. A small crowd had formed by now. Nothing dramatic. Just a few curious onlookers pretending to water plants or check mail. I could feel the unspoken tension. Some of them looked uncomfortable. A few looked entertained. She took a step closer. If you refuse to comply, we will escalate this legally. Escalate what? I asked. Your misunderstanding. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You have 24 hours to contact the HOA office and begin the registration process. Failure to do so will result in enforcement action. I folded my arms. I am not registering for something I am not part of. There was a long pause. Wind rustled the oak tree overhead. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Finally, she gave a short nod. Not of agreement, but of decision. Very well, she said coldly. We'll handle this properly. She turned sharply and walked back to her SUV, heels clicking like punctuation marks on asphalt. As she drove off, I had the distinct feeling that this argument wasn't over. It was just getting started. A few days after the driveway confrontation, I was starting to think things might settle down. I'd spoken with neighbors, double-checked the property records, and mentally prepared for a drawn-out battle with HOA bureaucracy. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that Thursday evening. I was sitting on the porch, laptop open, catching up on emails, when I heard a loud knock on the door. Not the casual, friendly kind, but the firm, official kind. My heart skipped. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to see two uniformed police officers standing there, badges glinting in the porch light. Good evening, sir, the taller one said politely, though there was an unmistakable edge of tension in his voice. We here regarding a complaint of trespassing. I blinked. Trespassing? In my own house? Yes, the officer replied. We received a report from the neighborhood HOA that someone occupying this property was refusing to comply with community regulations. I stepped aside to let them in, still trying to process the absurdity of the situation. I showed them my deed, property tax statements, and the title documents confirming that my home was never part of any HOA. The taller officer examined everything carefully while the second officer nodded along. According to these records, you own the property, he said finally. This complaint seems unusual. Unusual, I echoed. They're reclaiming I am trespassing in my own house because I didn't register with an HOA I am not even part of. The officers exchanged a glance. One of them sighed. We deal with HOA complaints occasionally, but this is the first time I've seen one escalate to a trespassing report against an actual homeowner. Usually, it's just fines or letters. I explained the sequence of events. The orange notice, the pink notice, the woman driving past with a clipboard, and finally her confrontation on my driveway. The officers listened patiently, jotting notes as I recounted every detail. After a while, the taller officer spoke again. Here's what we were going to do. Since you have clear legal ownership, we can take any action against you for trespassing. The HOA can make complaints, but enforcement has to follow the law. You well within your rights to refuse registration. Even as relief washed over me, I could feel a simmering anger. The fact that someone thought they could weaponize the police against me in my own home was infuriating. It was a new level of HOA overreach, bordering on harassment. The officers left with instructions for me to document everything moving forward, including the notices and any further interactions with the HOA. They were professional, but I could tell they were a little baffled themselves. Even they admitted it was one of the stranger cases they'd encountered. Once the door closed, I sat back down on the porch, staring at the orange and pink notices I had taped to my fridge earlier as evidence. For the first time since moving in, I felt the full weight of how serious this HOA was about controlling things that legally weren't theirs. I realized this wasn't going to be a simple matter of ignoring letters or waving them off. They had already gone to the extreme of involving law enforcement, even if it didn't work in their favor. From that moment, I knew I had to prepare for a fight. Not just any fight, but a battle to defend my right to live in my own home without interference from entitled HOA Karens who believed the neighborhood belonged to them. This was no longer about shrubs or trash bins. This was about ownership, authority, and setting a boundary they clearly didn't understand. After the police left, I knew the only way to end this saga was to hit the HOA with the hard, undeniable truth. Official, legal documentation that proved my house had never been part of their association. I pulled out the county property records, my title insurance paperwork, and the closing documents I had meticulously saved from the day I bought the house. Each sheet was a nail in the coffin of their so-called authority. The next morning, I drafted an email to the HOA board. I attached scans of every document and wrote clearly, according to official county records, my property is not part of your association. I am the legal owner and am not subject to your bylaws. Any further harassment or threats of fines or police involvement will be documented and may result in legal action against the association. I hit send with a mixture of triumph and nervous anticipation. Almost immediately, the responses started trickling in. The first one was from the woman who had confronted me on the driveway. Her tone was different this time. Cold, clipped, almost defensive. Thank you for your email. We will review our records and respond shortly. That was all. No further accusations. No threats. Just a thinly veiled attempt to buy time. By the afternoon, the entire board had scrambled. Emails were flying back and forth, and I could sense the panic beneath their professional veneer. One board member even called my number directly, insisting they had always assumed the property was under our jurisdiction, and that they would correct the records immediately. The arrogance that fueled their initial attacks was replaced by a flustered, almost apologetic tone. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I made a point to document every interaction. I knew from the moment this started that I had the upper hand, and I intended to keep it. The truth was irrefutable, and their attempts to intimidate me had now painted them as the aggressors. Later that week, I noticed something interesting. The neighborhood gossip began to shift. People who had once nodded along politely at the HOA's declarations were now whispering about the mistake, and about how audacious the HOA had been to confront someone legally outside their authority. Some neighbors even came by, curious and amused, offering congratulations and recounting stories of the HOA's overreach in the past. The HOA, meanwhile, issued a formal statement to all residents. It was carefully worded, vague enough to avoid admitting guilt, but clearly a retraction of any claims against me. They acknowledged a recording discrepancy and promised clarification of community boundaries. In other words, they admitted nothing outright, but everyone knew who had won. For me, the victory was more than just proving that I wasn't bound by an HOA. It was a lesson in standing your ground, trusting your documents, and refusing to let entitled individuals manipulate authority. The orange and pink notices that once intimidated me were now framed on my office wall. Reminders of how absurd the situation had been and how firmly I had reclaimed my right to live freely. By the end of the month, the HOA had completely backed off. The police were no longer involved. My yard was mine. My driveway was mine. And my freedom, the very reason I had bought a non-HOA home, was intact. What had started as a power trip by an overzealous HOA Karen ended in embarrassment for them and vindication for me. I had learned an important truth. When the law is on your side, no amount of entitlement or intimidation can stand in your way. Next time, HOA Karens want to know what hit them. Subscribe now.